Hello, I'm Dr. Linda Steingold, Director of Dermatology Clinical Research at Henry Ford Health System in Detroit, Michigan. Welcome to the fourth episode of our Innovations in Dermatology podcast entitled The Evolving Acne Treatment Landscape. Joining me today is Dr. Julie Harper, who's the founder of the Dermatology Skincare Center of Birmingham in Alabama. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Linda.
Today, I'm excited to talk about updates in the treatment of acne, and we've had so much going on in the past several years. And I thought we'd start by talking about the advances in retinoid technology. We've seen so much going on, and we've seen advances in tretinoin, tazarotene, and trifarotene. So with tretinoin lotion, we've actually seen a formulation that's better tolerated than any of the other formulations. And we know with topical retinoids that redness, stinging, and burning can be a problem. So better tolerated tretinoin is always a good thing. And then we have tazarotene in a 0.045% lotion that we find with this innovative vehicle, we actually have a equally efficacious tazarotene to the 0.1%, but better tolerated. And Julie, I love to remind people that the 0.05% is not FDA approved for acne, only for psoriasis. So here we have even a lower concentration that's better tolerated and equally efficacious. So we do have a new topical retinoid. Can you talk to us about trifarotene and tell us what does this actually bring to the table?
Well, I definitely can, but I first want to just tag on to what you were saying about the tazarotene lotion product. It was the phase 2 study when they went head to head against something with twice the percentage and showed that they worked as well and had better tolerability. And that's definitely translated into my clinic. I think it's a very well tolerated, efficacious product. But we have another very well tolerated, efficacious, kind of novel, I might even call it advanced topical retinoid, and that's trifarotene. We have not had a new topical retinoid as far as a molecule goes for really like 2 decades. And if you just think about what has happened in the biologic world in that amount of time, think about how many new biologics we've had in psoriasis. So I think it is probably about time that we have a new retinoid. But what is specific about this one? I'd say there's probably 3 main things about it. Number one, it is specific for the retinoid receptor, the gamma receptor. And that's the receptor that is found predominantly in the skin. In fact, about 87% of the retinoic acid receptors in the skin are gamma. And because of that, then the second thing is that it's effective at a very low dose. How many other topicals do we know that have so many zeros in the percentage? So trifarotene is 0.005%. So very low percentage of the active ingredient. And I think that just speaks to the fact that this is a product that's very potent because it's specific to the receptor that sits in the skin at the highest percentage. The third thing that I think is unique about trifarotene is they did something that you would have sworn is not new, but they studied this in truncal acne. And it's the first time, really, I think, ever in a phase 3 trial that we have had a topical product be evaluated on truncal acne in the exact same way that it was evaluated on the face. So to be in the study, you had to have moderate facial acne, but you also had to have moderate truncal acne. And lesion counts were done on both the face and the trunk. Global assessments were done on the face and the trunk. And guess what? It worked well on both of those locations. It did not work faster on one or the other. It worked equally well on both, and it was well tolerated in both locations.
Now, Julie, what's interesting is we generally think about retinoids as not being effective or well tolerated on the trunk. And this was one study that showed us that that's just not necessarily true.
Yeah, so it really kind of called me out because, I have preached for years that retinoids have to be the mainstay of acne treatment. And I really lived up to that on the face, but I wasn't always quite as committed to get that retinoid on the trunk just because I think I really thought maybe it wouldn't work as well. Maybe it was going to be irritating. Maybe it would work slower. And in this study, if you put the graphs side by side, face comparing trunk, you wouldn't be able to tell which one was which. And so we need to recommit to use those retinoids, not just on facial acne, but also on truncal acne.
So let's move on and talk about a newer fixed combination that we should soon have available. And this is actually mixing the unmixables. We actually have an encapsulated benzoyl peroxide and a tretinoin that is in a silica shell. So we know we can't necessarily mix tretinoin and generic benzoyl peroxide. I mean, Julie, a lot of people like to do that because it's cost effective, but we know that tretinoin, if it's not encapsulated, is actually inactivated by benzoyl peroxide. So I think this is something that's novel. And I always like a fixed combination because we know that two products generally are better than one.
I was just going to say, I agree with you. And I love how you said mixing the unmixable, because that's true. And it's really a novel way to put these two active ingredients together. And I think I'm with you, as somebody who is in the clinic every day, fixed dose combination products do well with our patients from a adherence and compliance standpoint too.
I think it's important. It sets our patients up for success.
Yeah.
Now, looking at other topicals, we have the novel minocycline foam, and we know this was FDA approved in a 4% formulation for acne, a 1.5% formulation for rosacea. What I find interesting is that this drug has a vehicle that's a foam that actually is non-irritating, non-drying, but it was also effective for both the comedones as well as the inflammatory lesions. Now, Julie, we talk so much about resistance. Do you think that we can relax a little bit with this minocycline foam or not necessarily?
A little bit. Let's just say a little bit. We need more time, but there's some really interesting science out there, and I'll try to say this briefly. So the idea with this drug, this topical drug, is that they are able to achieve, the minocycline foam achieves a super high level in the skin, but a very minuscule low dose in the blood. So in the blood, the dose is so low, it would be below like an average MIC. So it's not acting like an antibiotic in the blood at all. Think about like a modified release doxycycline. So if we're staying below the MIC, we shouldn't have to worry about resistance systemically. In the skin, the levels that are achieved are so high that they're killing, I hate to say this is overstatement, but they're killing kind of everything, even the bacteria that would have some resistance to that. The dose is so high that it overwhelms that. And so the thought is, because of the high dose in the skin and the low dose systemically, perhaps we don't have to worry about resistance. But I'll say with that, time is going to tell. This is a product I've really enjoyed using in my acne patients because the vehicle is so unique. I mean, what other vehicle do we have that we're not saying, in the first few weeks, you're going to have dryness and peeling? We don't see that with this product. This is a product that is moisturizing from day one.
And I think this might be nice used in combination, potentially even with a topical retinoid or benzoyl peroxide if we do worry about resistance. Absolutely. I want to move to the next one, that this is a novel, really new mechanism of action, and that's clascoterone, which is our first topical androgen receptor antagonist. So, Julie, just briefly, how do you envision using this in your actual practice?
Well, I'm super excited about this because it is totally unique. And probably where I am most excited, Linda, is that I'm going to be able to use this in guys. I think too often we think hormonal acne, we just get this image in our head of a female with that lower face acne or the U zone or muzzle zone distribution. But we do well to remember that all acne is hormonal, including in the guys. And right now we don't have any hormonal treatment we can use in a man because of systemic exposure. They don't want to have an overall systemic anti-androgen effect. But this product works in the skin. And so again, we get we get skin levels that achieve the result that we want, but there's minimal systemic exposure. And this was studied in men and women in the clinical trials. So I'll be using it in both. I'll be using it in combination with other things. I don't think it's going to be a monotherapy, but in particular, I'm excited to have a hormonal-based treatment that I can use both in women and men.
And I agree with you. And I also am anxious to see if it does actually decrease sebum as we think it might based on its mechanism of action. So time will tell.
That's right.
Now let's move on to our new technology in oral antibiotics. And we have sarecycline, which was a drug that was actually developed for acne. It has a structure that was actually developed to minimize the potential for bacterial resistance. It's a narrow spectrum drug, which means that it doesn't affect gram negative. So we decrease the risk for collateral damage of hitting other bacteria that we don't want to hit. We can take it with or without food. It has really great anti-inflammatory properties. It was studied on the chest as well, chest, back, as well as the face. So, Julie, talk to me a little bit about how do you envision really incorporating this into your acne practice?
Well, I think this has also been a game changer. I love everything you just said about it. Probably the part of this drug that speaks to me the most is the narrow spectrum. Let's target C. acnes, but let's don't target all of those gram-negative GI bugs. We don't need to be hitting those. The words that I've heard Jim Layden and Hillary Baldwin talk about are we don't need the ecological mischief of hitting things that we're not trying to target. And so that really, really appeals to me. Also, the once a day with or without food makes this an easy product for our patients to use. But I think it also appeals to our patients, and maybe even more so to their parents. People are concerned right now with, big doses or long courses of systemic antibiotics. And so I try to explain pretty much every time I write this, that this was developed for acne and that it should not have as much impact on the gut as a broad spectrum antibiotic. And unfortunately, that includes doxycycline and minocycline. It shouldn't have the same impact that those drugs should. And, you and I have talked about, will this over time, will we become even maybe more comfortable using it a little longer than we would some of those other products? I'm not quite ready to go there yet, but this is a different animal with that more narrow spectrum and less impact on the gut. So it may be something that we'll be able to use on a more long-term basis.
And I agree with you, Julie. I think that, we talk about using oral antibiotics for limited periods of time, but I think the idea of a 3-month course is often just really not going to get you where you need to be. I often feel maybe a 4 or 5-month course is more practical and really aiming for clear skin. Your thoughts on that?
I always shoot for that. I always shoot for 3 to 4 months, but so often you get to month 4 and they're definitely improving. The patient, maybe they're at that point, they're 65% better. And if you could just go a little bit longer, we would be able to achieve closer to clear. And so I just like the idea of having a product that I guess the word is safety. There's more safety associated with this. And I love safety because when you think of the patient population we're treating who has acne, these are otherwise most of the time healthy people. And so we want to be using products that we know are safe, not just in the short term, but also potentially over a longer period of time.
Okay, let's just finish by talking about something else that's on the horizon. And this is our first triple combination. We have a triple combination that utilizes a topical adapalene, a benzoyl peroxide, and a clindamycin. All 3 of these drugs are micronized in one fixed combination. I'm excited about this because it did look like the triple product had really an equal contribution of each one of the individual ingredients. And I know, Julie, you have questions about this.
Yeah, you and I've talked about this one too. Man, I used to be so excited about the idea of a triple. And then as we've gone along through time, so often we're trying to get away from some of those topical antibiotics. I'm not really convinced that the clindamycin adds a whole lot. So convince me, Linda. Tell me that clindamycin is doing some important work there.
And Julie, you know what? You're so right. When we look at the fixed combinations of benzoyl peroxide and clindamycin, who's doing all the work? It's a benzoyl peroxide. Yes. Absolutely. And the clindamycin gives a little tiny kick. Well, what's interesting here is when you look at the individual contribution of each one of these, they're almost all the same. So when we get the triple, it might have the highest efficacy of any of the topicals that we've seen thus far. So I think time will tell. My feeling about giving fixed combinations, simplify the regimen for patients, let them do less rather than more. And if you give somebody a double or a triple or something, that's easy to use, if you can give a medication 1 pill a day as opposed to 2 pills a day, it's more likely that a patient will be able to incorporate what you're asking them to do into their treatment regimen and potentially setting them up for success. So Julie, any final comments, any advice you would give our listeners? You've treated so many acne patients so well.
I would just say, if you haven't tried some of these new products, bring them into your treatment armamentarium. We know that the same tools don't work for every single patient. Our patients do deserve to get as close to clear as they possibly can. So use these things in combination with each other. We're not trying to get people better. We're trying to get them just as close to clear as we possibly can.
And I totally agree with you. It's the art of medicine. We're going to mix and match and really get the best combination that works for that individual patient. So Julie, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to everybody for participating in this activity. Please continue on to answer the questions that follow and complete the evaluation.